The honorary degree will now be conferred, and it is my great pleasure to introduce Louise Arbour. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honourable Louise Arbour is one of Canada's preeminent jurists. Throughout a long and luminous career, she has championed those noble but fragile ideas of truth and justice with courage and with grace. In so doing, she has earned the respect and admiration of all who abhor violence and who cherish peace and justice. Educated at the Collège Regina Assumpta in Montreal and at the Faculté des Droits of the Université de Montréal, she was called to the Quebec Bar in 1971 and the Ontario Bar in 1977. Her talent and dedication were recognized with a series of distinguished appointments, first as law clerk for the Supreme Court of Canada, and then as an assistant and ultimately associate professor and associate dean of Osgoode Hall Law School. In 1987, she was appointed to the Supreme Court of Ontario and later to the Court of Appeal of Ontario. And in 1995, she became commissioner to conduct an inquiry into the prison for women in Kingston, Ontario. Her stature as a wise and perceptive jurist grew in legal circles both at home and abroad. In 1996, the Security Council of the United Nations signaled to the world its confidence in her experience and judgment by asking her to serve as chief prosecutor to the 1990s tribunals examining war crimes and crimes against humanity and genocide in Rwanda and the former Yugoslavia. She carried out those duties with an even-handed dignity and determination that impressed everyone. Indeed, her conduct in this exceptionally challenging and sensitive role gave new meaning to the expression grace under pressure. Subsequently, she was appointed to the Supreme Court of Canada, where her tenure was highlighted by several decisive and far-reaching criminal law rulings. In 2004, the United Nations once again turned to Louise Arbour and appointed her its High Commissioner for Human Rights. In this capacity, she courageously promoted humanitarianism and justice around the world. And just recently, she has assumed the twin roles of President and Chief Executive Officer of the International Crisis Group. Louise Arbour is a companion of the Order of Canada. Many institutions have recognized her with medals and awards and numerous honorary degrees. And today, we are honored to pay tribute to this inspiring Canadian for her contributions to law and society. Louise Arbour, by virtue of the authority vested in me and in the Senate of this university, I hereby admit you to the degree of Doctor of Laws, honoris causa. Dr. Arbour will be hooded by the Associate Vice President Academic, Dr. Bill Crane, and the Registrar, Ms. Kate Ross. It is with pleasure that I now call on Dr. Louise Arbour for her convocation address. Dr. Arbour.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, members of faculty, dear graduates, family, and friends. It is customary to begin this kind of address with the appropriate expression of humility and gratitude, and I'm very happy to do so with utmost sincerity on both counts. I am indeed very honored to find myself graduating with you, and I'm conscious that I've earned this degree in ways that probably appear to you considerably less strenuous than what you have been put through in the last few years. In fact, my degree, to a large extent, looks backwards to what I've tried to accomplish over a long period of time. Your degree looks to some extent to your more recent past, and today's event is above all an occasion to rejoice in your accomplishments and to recognize the invaluable contributions of members of your family, your friends, and your mentors who have walked with you all along the way. But I think your degree also looks forward. It's a call to action, an invitation to contribute, maybe even a mortgage on your conscience. I don't want to suggest that the burden of the world should fall on your shoulders. But if you pause to situate yourself on this planet, you will have to acknowledge the uniquely privileged position in which your education has placed you. Not only you're going to be able to make a living, to support yourself and your children, but you will also be able to nourish your own intellect and spirit, and eventually theirs. This is not a given for millions of people elsewhere in the world who were born, according to the United Nations, equal to us in rights and in dignity. My own career has been full of opportunities and of surprises. I find myself today at the head of a terrific international nonprofit organization called International Crisis Group, dedicated to the prevention and resolution of deadly conflicts, after a long career in the law, both nationally and internationally. I think that my work speaks of an era, not just of opening opportunities for women in the legal profession and in public life, but also an era of greater opportunities within the law for everyone. Apart, of course, from the liberation of society and the dividends of the feminist movement of the 1960s and 70s, the impetus for the kind of change reflected in my professional life is rooted, I think, in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It may seem very far-fetched to ascribe such a far-reaching impact to a set of constitutional provisions, but the launch of a culture of rights anchored in ideals of equality and fairness was, for many lawyers of my generation, both a promise and a call to service. The Charter came into force in 1982. It enshrined equality and language rights. It transformed procedural fairness into enforceable guarantees. But more than anything else, it made Canadian courts relevant to the day-to-day lives of Canadians and to our public conversation as a nation like courts had never been before. That made it possible, some might say it made it imperative, for people like me to be appointed to the court, and just as importantly, it made it imaginable and attractive for people like me to want to become judges. I then became the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Tribunals for the former Yugoslavia and for Rwanda in The Hague through most unpredictable circumstances. Again, I feel very privileged to have been part of a novel and daring enterprise. The prosecution of war criminals in the former Yugoslavia and in Rwanda in the mid-1990s was an unprecedented effort to integrate justice in the restoration and peace and in the rebuilding of societies brutalized not just by war, but by criminal atrocities within war. My primary expertise as a lawyer had been in criminal law, and I had never had reasons to believe that I would, in my lifetime, see criminal accountability reach the international scene, and even less reason to believe that if it ever did, I would be part of it. This was the most imaginative, novel, and promising initiative launched by the Security Council of the United Nations in the face of the world's apparent impotence to prevent these mass atrocities from occurring in the first place. This effort was launched some 15 years ago, and it is now irreversible with the coming into force of the International Criminal Court in 2002. It's far from perfect, but it has steadily gained momentum and will continue to do so. In contrast, when I returned to the international scene in 2004 to become the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, it was not a time of bold and daring initiatives. In fact, it was a very difficult time for human rights advocacy. The event of September 11, 2001, and the many misguided responses to these events polarized world opinion and set back many important human rights norms, including the protection against torture and arbitrary detention. In developing countries where globalization has yet to produce the anticipated benefits, at least for the very poor, there is a growing sense of double standards and of injustice in the face of persisting inequalities. And the economic crisis that has affected so many Western democracies is very unlikely to do so for the benefit of the poorest countries in the world. As we all have, I have learned many valuable lessons along my professional journey. One is never to take anything for granted. I suppose it's in the nature of change that it does not always occur for the better, or that sometimes it is stopped dead in its tracks. It's particularly difficult to effect positive change on issues around which there's very little hope for a broad-based public mobilization. I've now agreed to lead Crisis Group, a well-established organization dealing with conflict prevention and resolution through field-based research, analysis, policy prescription, and advocacy. I'm moving farther away from the law, but I feel closer to a world in constant motion. In hindsight, and looking back at my career so far, I realize that I have an irresistible, I hope not fatal, attraction to change and novelty, at least as long as change presents a real personal challenge and an opportunity to be part of something important and forward-looking. I continue to have great confidence in the possibility for change for the better, including deep, profound change that may seem unimaginable until it actually starts happening. I believe that this is what happened in the Canadian legal culture and in the Canadian and Quebec societies in which I grew up. I believe in resilience and in the great mobilizing power of people and of ideas. I'm sure you do too. I wish you a very fulfilling and surprising career. The world is constantly changing. Don't let it change without you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Arbour.